want to go?
There you go.
Okay. Okay. I'm Carl Brewer, and for those of you that don't know who I am, I was the former mayor in the city of Wichita. I'm a first-generation Kansan, married, 4 children, 13 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren, and I'm only the only Democrat that's ever done 2 consecutive terms in the largest city in the state of Kansas. But then taking a step further, I come from corporate America, where I was a executive and manager for Spirit Aerosystems, which was the commercial side of the Boeing company, and I served 21 years in the military. I started at the ground floor in the military as a private, worked my way up through the non-commissioned officer ranks, and before my 29th birthday, left and went to officer candidate school. I commanded infantry and armored tanks, and then worked on various different staffs for different generals. In corporate America, I started out as a sheet metal mechanic, and then worked my way up from there, from a sheet metal mechanic to become the manager. But along the way, I represented the AFL-CIO Machinist Union and addressing issues on state labor laws. And so, I made the decision to be able to run for governor because I didn't like the direction that this country was going, and certainly before that, the state of Kansas was going. When we were having budget shortfalls and individuals couldn't figure out how to bring people together, to get people to work together in the best interest of our communities and our families. And I seen from being a mayor firsthand how bad decisions impact our families and our homes and our communities. And so upon looking at that, whether it would be education, whether it be with healthcare, or whether it would be economic and job creations, or allowing us in local government to define our own future, the only way that was going to happen is that we were at the table. And so since I clearly understand what those decisions and those impacts actually are, and those unintended consequences when it hasn't been given enough thought and when decisions are made, that the only way that you can do that is be there and be at the table. And it starts with at the very top. And we have not had that in previous elections, and had the individuals at the very top that have experienced and walked in your shoes, that have experienced what you have experienced, and been there speaking on your behalf. So I made the decision that if you can't fix it, don't complain about it. Get involved and work on fixing it and fix it. And so I'm a firm believer that getting involved and working to be able to do that, addressing issues. When we start talking about public safety, the list goes on and on as to what we need to look at. It extends farther than just police officers. It extends farther than just courts. And we need to address public safety in a much more rational and a smart way of being able to do it, and figuring out how we can make our communities safe. And so after looking at that, I made the decision that I was going to run for governor, and I was going to change. I was going to give each of you, our employers, an opportunity to have a voice and to be at the table in the decision-making process that affect our everyday lives, but also keeping you informed as to what's going on, what's happening, whether we're making progress or whether we're failing. If we're making progress, each and every one of us needs to celebrate. If we're failing, then it's my responsibility to stop, to explain to you why we're failing, and we come up with another strategy and another plan to ensure that we are successful. So with that, I encourage you to go to Brewer for Kansas and find out more about who I am, and I look forward to talking to you more and answering your questions today.
Hi, my name is Jack Ferguson, and I'm a Democratic candidate for governor. I would like to say that I am running because I believe Kansas is on the wrong track, and I believe the Democratic Party needs to have new ideas brought into it. I think even though the Democratic Party is offering a lot of good solutions to the problems, I think we need to go in a new direction. We need to be more bold in our in the policies we're offering to fix Kansas. And that is what my campaign is trying to do. I'm trying to bring a new, fresh face to Kansas so we can have a true people's representative in the governor's office. And I'd also like to say thank you to the Reno and Harvey County Democrats for hosting this event, and everyone for coming out today. And I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Hi, I too would like to thank the Reno and Harvey County Democrats for not only organizing this forum, but for sending me 2 wonderful colleagues. Senator Carolyn McGinn, who represents Harvey County, and Senator Ed Berger, who represents Hutchinson and other parts of Reno. Particularly in Hutchinson, You didn't send me somebody so good before. If you can't send me a Democrat, it's the next best thing. So I want to thank you for both of those wonderful people. I am Laura Kelly. I am a state senator. I'm a wife and a mother and a very proud daughter. My dad was in the Army. I grew up in the military. Traveled all over the world. My first language was actually Japanese. By the time I was 15, I had lived on 3 continents, moved 12 times. So when it came time for my family to put down some roots, Kansas actually became a very easy choice. My husband and I met and married in Denver, but when we started our family, we really wanted a place that had great schools and that we had a real sense of community. Both of us had been sort of nomadic as children. So we chose Kansas, and I'm glad I did. Both of my daughters got a world-class education because they had absolutely great teachers, and that is why I'm running for governor. I'm running for governor because I want every Kansas kid to have the same opportunities that my daughters had to succeed. Fighting for kids is nothing new to me. It's been a lifelong mission. Right out of high school, I went to work with troubled teens. Then when I came to Kansas, I spent 18 years as executive director of the Kansas Recreation and Park Association. I traveled all around the state trying to make our communities better for our families. And that's what I've done in the legislature. I have fought for our families and our kids, particularly most proud of the accomplishment of establishing our early childhood block grants and some after-school programs. So it's always been my highest priority. The last 8 years, I'm sure none of you are surprised by this, but it's been pretty tough times in Kansas. Sam Brownback and Jeff Collier have really damaged our state. They've decimated our schools, and they've unraveled the very fabric of our communities. We really need to put that back together again. Kansas needs a strong, experienced leader to put it back together again. I don't have a personal political agenda. I'm really running because I want to work for the state and for our families and our kids. Through my work on the budget, I've been on the Ways and Means Committee in the Senate for 14 years. I know the budget, and I'm committed to our schools and to health care, and that is what makes me uniquely qualified to be governor and to fix this mess. I have a reputation for working across the line, working with anybody, whether I see eye to eye with them, to get things done. It's how I became a Democratic state senator in a very Republican district, and it's how I will win in November. I'm ready to get to work to undo the damage of the Brownback-Collier era and start investing in our state again. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Tabman, and thank you for my colleagues for joining us here. Thank you for hosting. I spent my life in public service, not as a politician, but in public service. I started my career as a police officer. I did 2 years on patrol, and then I was fortunate enough to be selected as the first hostage negotiator on the Department's Special Weapons and Tactics team, and back then went to a school shooting, which was long before they were so commonplace, and we were struck with having to handle this matter that we had no experience in handling. After my time in the police department, I joined the FBI. I spent 24 years there. Yes, a Democrat in the FBI. That's a little adaptability, if you're wondering. I spent the first part of my career working general crimes, bank robberies, violent crimes, as I say, white-collar crime, which I'm not so sure isn't happening right now in Topeka. I moved on to some of the mob up in New York. I spent most of my time on the street working narcotics. I came here after I joined the management ranks as the Assistant Special Agent in Charge. I was here with you on 9/11. After serving here for 2 years, my career path was that we would move and go to the next office. But after 2 years of living in Overland Park, my wife turned to me and said, no, I don't think so. She said, you go on with your career, you only have a few years left, and I and the boys will be here when you get back, if you're lucky. I got lucky. My wife is here with me. She's a special ed teacher and gave up her career when we met so she could raise 3 boys. I travel around the country, around the world. and now she's a special ed para. After I left this position, I was what's called an inspector out of headquarters. And I led a team of inspectors, internal auditors, traveling around the world with the sole purpose of making sure our operations, our government operations, were working effectively and efficiently. That every person and every work unit was producing what they were supposed to produce within budget, within the law, and with accountability. That we could account for all the resources given to us by the taxpayer. We had expertise in ferreting out fraud, waste, and abuse, and our job was to find best practices and implement them in government operations. After that position, I was promoted to the level of special agent in charge, where I was the chief executive of field division, 300 employees, both FBI agents and support employees, over 3 states. During that time, our leadership was again challenged when we experienced the worst school shooting at the time since Columbine. I was in command of that during very tough times. I retired over 10 years ago, and I'm now a businessman, own a couple of businesses. I'm an author. I've written 3 books, one of which I have outside. I raised our 3 boys here in Overland Park. And the embodiment of our commitment to health, education, welfare is there, right there with my wife. Not only has she dedicated her life to special education, but we have a son who needed accommodations in the schools. And we know the frustration of trying to get a school to give services that just don't have resources for it. So we've been there. My goal is to take my experience in effective change, in making government work effectively and efficiently, making them work for the people, and bring that to the governorship, make us work for you. And also, I want to change the environment, the tone of toxicity that is coming not only from the top of the country, but from the top of this state, because it's only going to lead to more violence and more trouble. Michael Tabman, I look forward to speaking to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful day. Thank you for being here. And I know many of us would probably be out in the garden if we could otherwise. So thank you very much as well for all the people that put this on. I know it takes a lot of work just to do that. So I'm Dr. Arden Anderson. I am a family practice doc and occupational medicine doc in Lansing. And I've been practicing medicine for a little over 20 years. And also I am a flight surgeon in the Air Force Reserves. I'm a colonel. And I am stationed currently out at Whiteman Air Force Base with the A-10 group. I've been deployed 3 times during war. I know what it's like to have to address issues of families being separated and dealing with PTSD, and unfortunately we have a lot of PTSD today from not only just the current war, but from past wars as well. And so I deal with a lot of that as well, just in my practice, because in Lansing, Leavenworth, there's a lot of military retired in that area, as well as the VA right there. I'm also a former teacher. I taught VOAG, vocational agriculture, and so I know what it's like to actually put lesson plans together. And when I taught, the ag class was the dumping ground for the school. If the teachers couldn't handle the child, we'll just put them in ag class. And so I am quite familiar with dealing with children that have problems, both home and away. In addition to that, my master's degree is in public health. I understand how you put things together from the environment as well as socially to the overall health. And so the key thing why I'm running for governor is because I actually have solutions. I'm actually an expert in healthcare. So I don't just talk about we need to change healthcare. I know what needs to be done in order to change healthcare to make it work. Do you know the United States spends $10,000 to $11,000 per person, and we are rated number 11 out of 11 of the wealthiest countries in the world as far as our healthcare is concerned, our overall health. We're 35th out of 195 countries. That's not very good. So throwing more money at a system that's not working very well doesn't solve it. It's not fair to your tax dollars and my tax dollars to think all we're going to do is we're just going to throw more money at it, kick the can down the road. I deal with this every day. I know Medicaid, I know Medicare, I know the private health insurance systems. I deal with it every day in my practice. And I also know what it's like for people not to have health care. I take care of some of those too. I have a few people that are on the street. Same thing with agriculture and the environment. It's one of those things in the Democratic Foundation, we care about the environment. I've taught vocational sustainable agriculture to adults for over 30 years. I've published over 5 books. I know how to make Kansas carbon neutral in 5 years. I know the science how to do it. I know the specifics, not just the talking points. As a cheerleader, I actually know how to do it. I'm Arden Anderson, Anderson 2018. Thank you very much, and we'll talk later.
I'm not Jim Ward, and I bet you knew that. I'm a guy that about 15 minutes ago was asked to read a message on this, which isn't my flip phone, so it's disappeared. But in some, it's from his campaign director, and Jim Ward sent his regrets for not being here today, and as I bet all of you know, he's into people fighting the good fight. Maybe my technical assistant will bring it up in a minute. If not, I'll wing it. This is reminiscent of old days. I used to teach down the hall, and I think I was prepared, and then everything would go out, and I'd call tech. This is my version of tech. Anyway, the message is some of the message that hey, okay. I'm back. By the way, Jim Ward did not approve this t-shirt, but he knows to have his back. From his campaign director, Jim regrets not being able to be here today. He's currently in Topeka fighting a good fight for school funding. Jim has been a strong, consistent voice of Kansas people, not the wealthy corporations. Through his time on the Wichita City Council, Kansas Senate, Wichita Board of Education, Kansas House, and I'm losing it. He blew the whistle on discrimination and other problems of the DCF. He's the first person who scheduled legislation to expand Medicaid, and I'm just about to run out of light. And that's nearly the message. There we go. He knows how to make things work, and he knows how to get things done. Jim Ward is a true Democrat. Like I said, we're hoping for a miracle so that you can get down to Reno in time, but just in case, you'll have this. Thank you so much for being understanding, and thank you for bearing with me. And this is the last time I walk past these gentlemen campus.
Hey, let's see your shirt, front on.
Okay. So I'll take advantage of that. I'll exploit that. As everybody knows here, it's killing me that we don't have somebody to run against Roger Marshall. So talk to me later if you're going to consider it. But thank you.
You're going to consider it.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to add that Mr. Joshua Slotty and Mr. Robert Klingenberg were invited to this event, but both had to bow out due to other commitments. So with that, we'll go on ahead to the question and answer session. And I would like to thank Ron Sylvester and Joey Young, Ron Sylvester of the Hutchinson News, and Joey Young, who is the owner of several newspapers in the rural areas here in South Central Kansas, for agreeing to moderate this forum and for coming up with the questions. If you could please give them a round of applause before we get started. Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to try to keep the answers to 3 minutes. Timekeepers down here, just wave your hand if they don't stop, jump up and down, stand in the seat. But keep an eye on her. And Joey's going to start off with the first question.
All right, and this is for all the candidates. Paul Davis carried majorities in many urban areas, but still lost due to rural voters. Do you think rural voters are necessary to be successful in your bid for governor? If so, how do you plan on reaching these voters who disproportionately voted Republican in the last election? We'll start with Carl.
Okay. To answer the question, yes, and it requires one to getting out. I've been all over this entire state, from the borders to the western borders to the northern borders to eastern southern borders, eastern southern borders, and as I talk to those individuals, and I go into a particular town and I meet with them individually, whether it's a community center or a retirement center, or whether it's a particular business or a hardware store, and talk with them. And by the time I'm finished talking to them, they end up finding out they're Republicans based on these philosophies, but their wants and their needs are no different than the wants and needs of Democrats. It's just, we aren't expressing that. And the only way that's going to happen is if we start going out to these communities and start meeting with them and give them the opportunity to find out who we are. And many of those individuals have stayed their particular party because that's what their family was, or that's what their grandparents were. And they continue to do that, and that's the only thing that they know. I've certainly been able to communicate with Republicans. I mean, I come from Wichita, a very conservative community, was elected 2 terms, only Democrat in the history of the city of Wichita that's been elected 2 terms as mayor of the city of Wichita, the largest city. But then taking a step farther, I had about a 90% plus voting record with many of them. But a lot of them, what I did is I met with them and talked with them and brought all parties, whether they're Republican, Democrats, or Independents, to the table to define what it was that the community actually needed, and got them to not focus on the political issues, but focus on the issues that were affecting their families and their communities, their neighborhoods, or the businesses, and what do we need to do, and how do we fix it? And let's use common sense. And by bringing them together and taking their ideas and putting them all together, we were able to come up with resolution and able to be able to work those. But it had to be bringing everybody together, respecting everyone's ideas, everyone's views, everyone's opinions. And I think that that's one of the key things that we must do, is give everybody an opportunity to have a voice and be at the table, respect each other's views, but get everyone to not focus on their own agenda, but focus on each and every one of you and what are the needs that you actually have. And when I was president of the Kansas League of Municipalities and with the National League of Cities, I had that opportunity to already represent many of you and come to your communities and talk to you about what you needed during the worst recession in the history of this country. What did you need to be successful? How do we stop unemployment? How do we stop the brain drain? How do we address the issue of education, not only at the state level, but at the national level? And so I had an opportunity to address those issues with many of you in your communities and to represent you. But I had everyone there at the table, and we worked across party lines to be able to accomplish that. And that's what we're going to have to continue doing. We have to do more of it and reaching out to the other side. And you're going to have somebody that already has that experience, that knowledge, and that capability of being able to do that.
I think it is vital that we appeal to all communities in order to be competitive, not only in this election, but elections going forward. And ultimately, I think one of the reasons the Democrats have continually lost state legislatures and governorships across the nation is that we have really just a lot of Democrats across the country. The party, this national party, has kind of pushed, let's be Republican-like, let's go to the right. We saw this with Hillary Clinton. She was, she would have been a 70s Republican. So we really have to start, remember, people vote. If they see a Republican and a Republican light, they're going to go for the real deal. They're going to vote for the Republican. But if we have true, progressive, democratic choices, people will see the policy positions that truly help them, such as a living wage, expanding healthcare and all that, and they see that, like, okay, if the Democrats are pushing for those things, then we're going to go, okay, we're going to vote for the party. But if we kind of go along with the vein, if we continue with the national party just pushing on us, trying to say, let's go with the Hillary Clinton platitude slogans. I think that's what lost the 2016 presidential election, and that's what has continued. Being Republican-like has cost our party. We have to become bold progressives, and I think we have to regain that as a party. We have to truly become Democrats again, and when we do that, we will succeed.
Well, my Senate district is based in Shawnee County. I actually live about 1.5 miles from the capital, but it goes way out from there. So it sort of is a microcosm of the entire state of Kansas. I go up into Potawatomi County, which is quite rural, and then I used to have all of Wabunsee County, which is very rural. During my first campaign, my strategist said, Laura, don't worry about Wabunsee County, just focus where the votes are here in Topeka. I said, Joe, no, I don't think so. So I spent an inordinate amount of time out in Wabunsee County, going to every small town, knocking on every door I could, going to every forum, everything I could find to go out there. Well, come election day, I won by 100 votes. If I had not done that, I would not be here today. So I get it. I understand the importance of the rural vote, but it's not just for the vote that I go there. As executive director for the Kansas Recreation and Park Association, I was in rural communities all the time, really working with them to try to make their communities better. I think that their needs, their priorities are very similar to every other Kansan. They want good schools and they want well-funded schools. They need us to expand Medicaid so that their rural hospitals can thrive. It's extraordinarily important to them. They also need us to be good partners, the state to be a good partner with them in business development. We need to assist them in finding ways to use their assets to attract young entrepreneurs who create businesses where land is cheap, resources are there, and they can set something up. We've just got to figure out a way how to partner with them so that they can pull together as a community and attract those kinds of folks. I will pay close attention to rural Kansas. We can never forget that we are an agricultural state. This is where, this is really our breadbasket. And so we don't want to either lose that economics, nor do we want to lose that culture. It is part of what makes Kansas, Kansas. So you can trust that as governor, I will work very closely with ag communities and with our rural communities to ensure that we invest wisely and strategically to help them thrive, to help them grow.
How many of you listening to me recognize that I grew up in a rural area? Okay. No, I haven't. But when I arrived here as the assistant agent in charge, we covered all of Kansas. And it wasn't just Kansas City, where all the attention was. And I had to make a point of coming out here, all the way out to Garden City, to the line, to meet not just law enforcement, chiefs of police, but the mayors and the city council. Ask them, what is it you need? By the way, I've already made a good relationship with the chief of police here. Nice to meet you, by the way, thank you. And it was from there, actually, we, after 9/11, determined the need to establish a program in agroterrorism by listening to the rural community and understanding that was the next threat. And we set up working groups, and we listened. We know from the research that we've done the issues facing the rural community now: healthcare, education, the flight of young people, the jobs are diminishing. And we're not going to fix it by not sitting down and listening. So I think we all have the same agenda. It's not the numbers that we want. We want to hear your voice. That is the only way we're going to know what needs to get done. Thank you.
Well, we know by past experience that Kansans do vote person. Half of the governors have been Democrats in a Republican state. And that only happens when people vote person. We know from the recent experience in Virginia, one vote does count. One vote does make the election. And we also know by what happened in Virginia, Alabama, and Pennsylvania, where Democrats won in traditionally Republican areas, it was not the traditional politician that won. All the Democrats that won, primarily in those states, have been new to the mix. They have been moderates. We're in a Republican state. If you are not moderate, and particularly in rural Kansas, you will not get that vote that half of the governors have gotten in this state. I was raised on a small farm. I remember my parents talking about Detroit running the state of Michigan. That's where I grew up, on a small dairy farm in Michigan. And I remember them saying repeatedly that the rural communities did not get representation in the state. Detroit ran the state, or the urban areas ran the state. And it's the same here in Kansas. Most rural people, particularly if they've been here for generations, feel frequently that Topeka doesn't represent them. And so the way that we get representation, the way that we find representation is really talking about issues, not specific politics, because Americans have already shown they're tired of all the bickering between the Democrats and Republicans and not getting things done, whether it's Washington, D.C. or Topeka. We need to address issues, and those issues have to do with health care. And health care is important whether you are the far western border of Kansas or whether you are in downtown Kansas City. Health care is an issue, and we have to improve that. We have to make that happen. Education, the same. Public safety, public health, environmental issues. They are all the same concern, whether you are in downtown Kansas City or whether you are far west, far south, far corners of Kansas. The issues are, do you have somebody who actually knows how to solve these problems? How are we actually going to clean up the environment and make it so that farmers still can function and can still do the job that they need to do? We can have both. I've taught that for 30 years. We can have more profitability and solve the issues, and that's how we bring the rural in with the urban.
Thank you. So, Democrats in Kansas are faced with an unusual choice, in the primary. As a result, we hear a saying in Kansas that many of the best Democrats are registered Republicans. But there's actually a debate that I hear going on among voters, whether to among voters who identify as Democrats, whether to continue to vote in the Republican primary and try to influence the election that way, or since there's such a choice in the Democratic Party, to actually participate in the Democratic primary this year. What's your advice to them?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll just keep going in the same.
Just keep going the same process? Okay, that sounds fine.
If that's okay with you all.
They want me to set the tone for them. I would say that every person needs to be involved in the democratic process, and they need to, I understand that many have registered for various different things so they can vote Republican. This is an opportunity, and many of us up here will probably never see this again in our lifetime, to have the number of Democrats that are running for governor, and I think it's phenomenal. You're right, that deserves a round of applause. Because what's going on is we're sending a strong message to the rest of the world that this is not what they perceive Kansas to be, and that we are more like what Kansas is. And so, from that standpoint there, I encourage them to be involved in the democratic process and to re-register themselves as Democrats. But it's our opportunity as Democrats to change the way that people see us. Instead of sitting on the sideline, be in the game. Speak up for ourselves and not allow individuals to just go ahead and do whatever they choose to do to us. And to be able to explicitly speak about the things that are affecting us and not be silent about it, but also recognize that we have to have change here in Kansas. And I know that many of them, they think of the fact that, well, we've been doing it like this for the past 50 years or 75 years, and that's fine. The world is changing. Kansas is changing. Our children don't even have the same interests that each and every one of us have. And so they want to do something different. So it's our responsibility to, one, listen to them and to diversify what we have, but to bring them to the table, hear what they have to say, hear their ideas, hear their views, hear their wants and what their needs are, and to help them accomplish that. So that when we hand it to them, they have something to work with rather than our ideas or our ideology. So I'm a strong believer that bringing individuals to the table and giving them an opportunity to have a voice and explaining what's going on and allowing them to be able to work, that'll be the thing that will change us. And I certainly, as I said, I encourage Democrats to be involved, to be engaged, and to be able to vote as Democrats and make determinations. We're at a point in time where we need to have new leadership in Kansas. And we need true leadership, not figureheads, like we have been doing in the past. And because I know that we've had individuals where we couldn't find a candidate, and we were searching for somebody, just a warm body that was breathing. We need to stop doing that. Let's demonstrate that we're mentoring and we're grooming generations beyond to be the next leaders for the state of Kansas and for our communities. And it starts in our community, just like I did. It took somebody in my community to start grooming me at the grassroots level and being a community activist to prepare me to be where I am today. Each and every one of us, we owe the next generation and young people to do the exact same thing. I know individuals kind of frown and they kind of question when they see Jack here, but I'm proud of Jack. Because when I was 16, I was not thinking like Jack, and I was not thinking about how to be able to better my community. I was just doing it by cutting people's yards and doing things of that nature. Jack is wanting to step up and wanting to make significant changes, not only to the state, but to this country. So let's invest in them and start preparing them. But we have to do that by leading by example, and that's our role.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer, for the kind words. And I think, yes, it is very important as Democrats to operate as one cohesive body and for Democrats to help influence the state and national parties at large. Because I think if you have a lot of Democrats who are saying, okay, I'll register a Republican so I can, maybe get some more moderates elected, yes, that may have some short-term benefits, but I think in the long term, it narrows down the base of the party and it ensures that there is not a wide scope of ideas being brought forth within the state Democratic Party, and that candidates in the primary may try to appeal to a narrow body than to a wider body of the people of Kansas at large. So I ultimately hope that every person who is a liberal will be registered as a Democrat and votes in the Democratic primary, as I think that's the only way we'll get a true sense of what people left of center in the state believe. And what they want to see from the state going forward, what kind of candidate they want to put forward. And I think that's very important, especially in a race like this, when there's each of us on the stage has something to offer. So I think that is definitely what I have to say on that. Thank you.
Well, this question reminds me that I need to text my husband to re-register as a Democrat. He really is a Democrat, but he is currently registered as a Republican. Because it is so seldom that Democrats have an opportunity to vote in primaries, to actually have two candidates on the ballot. And I think that's what we've seen in Kansas. I know in Topeka, one of my colleagues, Vicki Schmidt, who is a very moderate, thoughtful Republican, in her district, swarms of Democrats re-registered to help her get through a very, very tough primary. We do need to bring them home this time. We've got a primary. This is a very critical election, including the primary. So I think it's important that we do talk with our Democrat friends who are masquerading as Republicans at the moment and bring them back into the fold so that they can participate in this election this time. Yeah, I think we need to keep that in mind too as we're going out and doing voter registration and we're talking with our young folks as they're getting registered to vote, that they really need to pick their party, not necessarily what they think is the most strategic way to go about registering to vote. I think the fact that we have so many candidates running on the Democratic side says a lot. I've been going to a lot of these forums all over the state and other types of get-togethers, and the enthusiasm of the Democrats is palpable. I was just in Salina a few minutes ago, and we had a host of people come into a cafe bookstore there just to meet me, and they've been there to meet other Democrat candidates. We went over to the library where Democrats were meeting, and they were doing training to register people to vote and also to assist candidates, or if they were candidates, how to run an actual campaign. It's vital that we as Democrats continue to do that, to build on that enthusiasm and bring it to the table in August and in November.
When I consider the question of whether we should have people register an opposite party to sort of affect the outcome of the election, I get a vision of Chris Kobach running in here saying, "Aha, I caught you guys. This is election fraud." There is no election fraud out there. If I just made one quick story about election fraud before I answer this question. My years in the FBI when I was a rookie, there was always a little bit of hazing going on. And what we used to do when a new agent would come in, this was before computers, of course, we'd write a little complaint form, put it on a young agent's desk, so he wouldn't know what to do and run to a supervisor, look a little silly. So we'd always pick something that we didn't work, maybe a federal violation that didn't work. So we had two offenses that we write up. One was the Migratory Bird Act, and the second was election fraud, voter fraud. This just didn't happen. Anyway, but to get to your question, at my volunteer meeting we had a couple weeks ago, half of the volunteers were Republican crossovers, and my campaign manager is ecstatic. And they said, should we re-register as Democrats and vote for you? And my answer is yes, if you are voting from your heart. If that's what you want to do, you want to support me. But given my background, I can tell you that the thought of people trying to game a system, I don't like it. It won't work, and I think it's wrong. We have enough momentum now, given the extremism on the right, that we don't need to game the system, we don't need to have things backfire, we don't need to be accused of playing dirty pool. Maintain the course, stay as a Democrat, and vote your heart. Thank you.
I think that cross-primary voting is one of those things that can quickly backfire. And particularly, Democrats are a minority as far as the state is concerned. And if we want to push a precedent, the Republicans could easily overwhelm numbers and do the same thing to the Democrats. And so what happens is that you really end up with the least qualified or potentially least qualified person in there. And so I think the important thing is that we need to understand, we really need to keep it clean, vote Democrat. If you're a Democrat, go in and do the primary. And if you're a Republican, then you vote Republican in the Republican primary. And you vote whatever that person is, that best person that you think in that primary. And the problem is that if you are a Democrat, and let's say that you wanted one of the people up here to be the Democratic winner, but you decided, well, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to register as Republican because I don't want Chris Kobach to be the one. And your candidate that you may have wanted to win the Republican or on the Democrat side loses, if very many people potentially do that kind of thing. And so you may get the worst of both cases in playing that kind of a game. And so it's politics, obviously. And so we have a voter registration rule for a reason, and maybe we need to look at not making it quite so easy to change your voter registration back and forth, back and forth, back and forth within the same election cycle. And maybe not, I don't know, but that is certainly something that maybe we need to look at. And the other thing is that I think one of the things that you run into with an election where you have 6, 8, 10 candidates per party is that you run the risk that nobody gets even 30% of the vote. And so I would suggest that we look at, when we have this many candidates, is potentially taking the top 2 and then have a runoff of those top 2, and those then are the final candidates in the general election.
We'll start with Jack on this next question, because we probably should, change it up a little bit. We're calling it audible. We are. That's what we do. So in many of the areas my newspapers cover, they're rural, and healthcare access is limited or non-existent. What is your plan to address this? We'll start with Jack.
All right. Yes, healthcare is a major issue, as I think all of you know, in the state and in the nation. We definitely have to work, what we have to do is we have to make it so, one thing the state has to do, first of all, is expand Medicaid, so those that can get the health care needed. But also, I've looked at something called the Nevada Plan, which last year in Nevada, the state legislature passed a bill that would allow low and middle income people, families and people to buy into Medicaid, even if they weren't eligible for Medicaid. This would have given access to a lot more people. But the Republican governor of Nevada vetoed the bill, so we don't have any evidence of it working. But I believe it was a strong plan, and if we were to implement a similar plan in Kansas, we could get many people more health care until a national single payer system is passed. Hopefully, when the Democrats stay in Congress. Congress and the White House in 2020. So we have to look at that. I think that's my main plan for getting more people onto the healthcare rolls and making it more accessible in the short term for Kansas. But also we have to make sure that Kansas is attractive for good doctors and like to move to Kansas to make sure they want to work in Kansas. So I think with all that, I think that's what we need to start thinking about as Kansans and what healthcare needs we have.
Joe, I didn't hear you. Is this specific to rural healthcare?
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I agree with Jack. The first thing that we need to do is we need to expand Medicaid. That will do a whole host of things, and including helping our rural healthcare system. You know, since we've not expanded Medicaid, we know that independents lost their hospital, and they have been suffering greatly for that. We know that we have a lot of rural hospitals, particularly our critical access hospitals, that are on the verge of closing if we don't do something pretty quickly. So that's number one, that we have to do that. Number two, we do have to find ways to attract healthcare providers to our rural areas, and we've been working on that. I just introduced a bill last year that would expand our scholarships essentially to our medical students, which they don't have to repay if they come and they work in our rural communities. We've had that for primary care physicians for a long time. Last year, I was able to get that expanded to psychiatric students studying psychiatry. We have a terrible shortage of mental health providers in our rural communities, so it's essential that we do that. One of the other things that we've done this year that I think is crucial is organize our telemedicine programs. You know, in rural Kansas, we have had telemedicine in certain locations for a period of time, and it has worked wonders. If you go to Hayes Medical Center, they have a very sophisticated telemedicine program that is partnered with University of Kansas Medical School, Medical Center in Kansas City, Kansas. We need to take that model and really spread it all across our rural communities. Not just the rural communities, but it is the only way, quite honestly, that we will be able to provide mental health services to the capacity that they're needed, and subspecialty services. You know, most of what we've seen is like the Salina. Salina has their own medical school right now and a residency program we set that up specifically to attract students who are interested in rural Kansas medicine. We have 8 students per class, and it has been wildly successful in training doctors who then stay here. At Wichita, we expanded the medical school down there from 2 years. It used to be everybody went to KCK, and then they could opt for the last 2 years to go to Wichita. The Wichita school has the highest percentage of graduates who stay in Kansas to practice of any place. So we're doing some things. We have a lot more to do, but Medicaid expansion is the number one thing we have to do.
Not to speak for my colleagues who come after me, but I think we're all going to agree on the Medicaid expansion because that disproportionately helps rural Kansas more than it helps anybody else. Laura mentioned about the hospitals. There's some good news. Recently, several hospitals in Kansas were listed in the top 100 of America's best rural hospitals. 2 hospitals were selected for a pilot project with the federal government to receive funding. So there's some good news. On the contrary side, there's bad news. 1 in every 3 of our rural hospitals is on the verge of collapse. They're showing signs of failing. If these hospitals fail, one is the obvious. You're going to lose the medical coverage, medical care. The other is that hospitals are employers, and generally major employers in the rural areas. Those jobs disappear, those people disappear, the economy shrinks, and the problem compounds itself. It only gets worse. So we can't just say we need to help them, we have to have a plan for helping them. I've read many studies recently about Kansas rural hospitals, rural health care. There's platforms, the blueprints out there, what they should look like, physically, structurally, what services they should provide based on working with the community and doing an assessment of the community's health needs. And then there's the aspect it has to run like a business. So I'd like to know, where has the state been in going to these hospitals? Are we using our resources, our expertise? Are we working with the nonprofits and other experts to save these hospitals? Because either they will collapse or they'll be absorbed by a mega merger, and what happens then? It becomes the interest of the corporation, not of the community. My personal experience with the necessary rural community of having health care came when I went on the scene of this mass shooting. Back in 2005, 10 people were killed, tons wounded. This was on an Indian reservation. It cannot have been any more remote than most of the rural areas here. But everyone was there because it was a community that had a plan, they had an infrastructure, they had communications and cooperation, and it worked. And if they didn't have that, more people would have died. So we have to save these hospitals. We do need to come up with a plan, obviously on healthcare, we're all discussing that. I have an expert on my team who has worked his entire career trying to reduce the cost of healthcare for everybody. And we're working on a plan similar to what Jack said. We're looking at the best models in states that have worked. We're trying to cherry pick what has worked and what hasn't. Most of them are suffering now from rising prices and concerned about what is going to be the federal input to that. Because generally a lot of federal money comes in, it's drying up, and even if we were to get federal funds now, given the mercurial nature, shall we say, of our president, that could change tomorrow with one tweet. So we have to work on the way that states are more independent of the federal government for getting the health coverage. But we have to save the infrastructure of rural health care, not with an infusion of money that we don't have, but by working to implement best practices.
I think that last point was really needs to be driven home, and that is that you cannot trust the federal government, particularly at the present time. We need to overhaul the medical system first. We spend 2 to 3 times what every other country spends. And so you want to expand Medicaid. Wonderful. That's going to add, 50, 75, maybe up to 150,000 people in Kansas. If we overhaul the system like it needs to be overhauled, if we get that money closer to what Australia pays, they don't have less health care than we do, but they spend $4,300 versus our $8,700 just for Medicaid. So if we overhaul that system, that's now 370,000 more people in Kansas. That does more to the rural community support than 75 or 150,000, which is all straight Medicaid expansion does. Now then, if we overhaul that and you expand Medicaid, you help twice the number of people. Twice the number of people supports your rural communities, your rural hospitals. Number 2, if we want to get physicians in communities, one, of course, you have to overhaul healthcare so that we have more patients. Number 2, you have to be able to have scholarships for them, much like the military pays scholarships, and much like Indian Health Services pays scholarships. So that the doctor goes into a community, they're given a scholarship per year that they are in medical school. So if it's 1, 2, 3, 4-year scholarship, they have to stay 1, 2, 3, or 4 years in that rural community. That's their payback. Yes, you may turn over some doctors, but some of them are going to stay. That's what's going to keep doctors in your area. Number 3, osteopathic physicians are notoriously more family practice and rural oriented. One of the things that was proposed by Brownback, just so that he could have a talking point, was to have an osteopathic medical school in the state of Kansas. I will make sure that happens. I am an osteopathic physician, and I know how to make that happen. In fact, I'm on an independent committee for that process. Then we will have motivation for people to stay in the state and practice in the state. But we cannot continue to send good money after the corporate system. Where do you think this $10,000 to $11,000 per person or $8,700 on Medicaid is going? It's not going towards the people. It's going to corporate profits. It's not staying here in Kansas. So throwing more of our tax money against bad isn't going to solve the system. we have to overhaul it first so that that money stays here in Kansas and doubles the number of people. Not 370,000, not 500,000, but 750,000 people.
Okay. Well, certainly Dr. Anderson is correct in what he's saying about we must overhaul the system. And I certainly understand, I grew up in Wichita. It's a very humble beginnings. And I'll tell you that I didn't have adequate health care as a child. And I was an adult before I ever had an opportunity to go to a doctor. And I was an adult with an employer. If it had not been for that, I don't know where I would be today. So I can only imagine individuals that were not and are not as fortunate as I am. And as you heard me say, I have 13 grandchildren. I would love for them to be able to have adequate health care. We have to have expanded Medicare. There is no way around that. And if we don't have it, there's going to be a lot of people in our communities that are going to suffer, not only in urban Kansas, but also in rural Kansas, even more so. One of the things that, if you can imagine what it's like if you have to get health care at 10 or 12 o'clock at night, and you've got to make a 100-mile drive just to go get that health care. It's wrong. That is wrong in so many ways. We have to create an environment where we actually encourage individuals to practice medicine in the rural communities and in our communities, where we can get that quick and on hand, and that preventive medicine and any medicine that might be needed, and the help that we might need. We must create an environment where physicians want to go to rural Kansas. And the only way you're going to do that is we treat them with the same respect that we treat everybody else. And that is create an environment that by working with the communities, working with the local elected leaders, and finding out what is it exactly do you need and how many? What type of general practice that you may need? What type of specialized medicine do you need? And as individuals are finishing medical school, sit down with these individuals and give them that opportunity to go to rural Kansas. But the other portion is if you go to rural Kansas and you stay, then you don't have to pay for your education. And we want you to stay there. Once individuals start their lives there and they see how simple life is, many of them will stay in those particular communities. But create that environment. I was on the board for KU Medicine for Wichita, and we started out and they only gave us 9 medical students. And so we argued and we worked with KU Med Center to be able to increase it. Now it's in the 70s. And that hasn't been that long ago. We have to do that, and we have to bring local communities, engage them, and identify what it is that in those particular regions, what do they need, and talk to them. And I'm not saying that we as policymakers make the decision. You make the decision, and we work with you in being able to make that happen to cause those individuals. If you have those type of services that are there to be able to help them, then that can eliminate a lot of the brain drain that we have that's going on in rural Kansas and in our local communities. We need it whether it be in Hutchinson or whether it be in Sharon Springs or Colby, Kansas, or whether it's in Weir, Kansas. We have to create that type of environment. We need to address the mental issue and you provide mental health care for individuals that need it as opposed to incarcerating them. And because that incarceration is the easiest way for us to do it and not have to make a huge investment. It's wrong. We have to start doing things the right way as opposed to the easiest way. And that is, one, revamp our medical healthcare system, but invest in our medical healthcare system and making sure that it's a priority and work with local communities in being able to address it. That's not a Republican, that's not a Democrat, it's not an independent issue. That's a community and a health issue for the people that live there.
Okay, we'll start this next one with Laura and with Jack. And so one of the big issues that we have in this part of the state and moving west that faces our rural residents is access to information technologies that are really vital. 63% of rural residents in Reno County only have access to their to internet over their phones. You move west, there are entire towns and population centers that don't have reliable internet access. As governor, what specific plans would you support to try to make sure that all Kansans are connected to information technology?
Well, I think the information highway is as important as our concrete highways. And you know that we have de-invested in our transportation program over the past 7 years, and even before that. So, you know, I'm hoping that as governor, I will be able to work with folks around the state to start making reasonable reinvestments in our infrastructure, and that will include broadband. There have been some efforts made to increase capacity now. We actually have in our current budget bill provisions and funding that will increase the access to our schools in our rural areas that are not connected to the internet. I mean, it is nearly impossible for children in this day and age to learn without connection to the internet. So we do have some funding in there. I think if we get that passed, that we'll be able to provide connections for about 60 or so actual school buildings in places where they're not currently connected. We need to, you know, work with our utility folks and others to ensure that we've mapped it out. I mean, that's part of the problem, is that we really don't know where the gaps are right now. We need to map that out, see where those are, and then work with our utility folks to be able to build in that infrastructure and get it out to the areas. You know, it's important not only for our schools, but you know, I was saying before that we really do need to provide innovative ways to develop business in our rural communities. Nobody can do business in this day and age without internet connection. So it's imperative that that's one of the things that we make sure is in place, and one of the tools that we provide to our rural communities so that they can then use that as a way to attract and retain young people and entrepreneurs.
Building on what Laura said about education, the federal government has a program. They give a lot of money on E-rate to help schools build an infrastructure. And Kansas is part of that plan. As of the end of last year, about over 50 schools hadn't fully upgraded to fiber, despite money being available. Over half the schools weren't exploiting the amount of speed they could get from what they paid for. And there was still $30 million left for Kansas that had not been claimed for the E-Fund. I'll tell you this, when I'm governor, if there's federal money on the table, we're taking it. And this is where the state needs to step in, because E-Fund is not a simple process. You just can't click a box on the internet and say, I want it. The municipalities and school districts have to go out and work with providers and work with private industry and get a plan together. The state needs to step in there and work with them, so we grab that money and we have this infrastructure for our state. Why should it go elsewhere? As far as providing internet out to the rural area, I do have a plan, because on my team I have an expert in fiber, and he's already laid out to me a plan where the state partners with municipalities and private industries, builds a hub owned and controlled by the municipality, where now they can be an internet provider. They own that. From there, you have spokes going out to other municipalities. You can upgrade on your own without asking Google to upgrade you and pay more for broadband that already exists on the fiber. So the plan is there, we just need to enact it, and we're ready to do that on day one.
The first thing that we have to do is really a very thorough audit of the entire state, particularly related to all the public services, including all of the schools. And then we need to mandate, basically, if you're going to do business in the state of Kansas as an IT provider, you will cooperate in expanding so that minimally all of our public services and all of our schools are provided with or have access to that IT technology. And as my colleague has said, he's done his homework on this one, that there's already money there for expansion. And so we have to make sure that the IT companies are also cooperating with those federal mandates by bringing that technology into the state. And no question about it, in the future, and particularly because of the learning disability problems that we have, the increase in the number of IEPs that are going to be required, individual education plans, more and more of these children are going to have to be online in order to have learning plans. And more teachers are going to have access. And that's part of the way that many schools are looking to cut their costs, their operating costs, is by going to more online teaching programs. And so in order for that to occur, we have to have that IT technology in place in order for the schools to be able to administer and execute that plan.
Okay. Information technology is something that, that's for the future. And this discussion that we're having today, we should not be having. Because the conversation started over 10 years ago of what we actually needed. And the simplest way to find out, there are a lot of organizations that you can talk to, whether it be the Kansas League of Municipalities or going out. We have legislators that live in various different communities. What do you need? And we should find a way to be able to provide that. Now, that conversation came up years ago when I was mayor and I was with the Kansas League, and it was interesting because individuals wanted to back away from it and did not want to invest in it because the private sector said that they didn't want to invest that money right now. To me, I don't think that that's an appropriate thing. If it's something that we need in our communities to be able to help us, whether it's in schools or whether it's in hospitals or whatever that environment is or business, we should never allow the private sector to hold us hostage like that. And so we should have been investing in it and taking a position that, we're moving forward and we're going to put it into place. And we're going to find a way to make this happen. We have to make it a priority. If we're going to grow and we're going to keep the next generation and we're going to bring in new businesses, that is as equally important as water and the various different infrastructure needs that we have in our roads and highways. And we have to treat it that way because it's a form of communication. If the next generation, if they can't communicate with the rest of the world, they're not staying with you. They're going to where it's at. So that's one of the first steps that we have to do, so that we don't have any choice but to go ahead and make that investment and to be able to do that. And to do that, we've got to do a clear audit, but we need to be able to explain to you, whether you're in Northeast Kansas, Southeast Kansas, South Central Kansas, who are we taking care of and who we're not. Explain to you what we're spending the money on and what progress we've actually made. Because when you see it, it creates an entire ripple effect across not just the state of Kansas, but it creates an entire ripple effect across this entire country. And they start seeing that the state of Kansas is a much more progressive state than I thought it was. And I think that there are opportunities for us there.
Back in the 1930s and 40s, in the 1930s during the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt instituted the Tennessee Valley Authority to make sure that the rural areas of eastern Tennessee got electricity when the corporations wouldn't step up. I believe we should, at least here at local, state level and at the national level, we should create something to help, back then it was electricity, now it's the internet. If we implement a state-owned and operated system, and essentially, I think ultimately we could do this for all broadband, but especially in the rural areas where it's needed right now. To say, so start the public corporations, start the government public corporations, and essentially allow them to do it, and don't have don't have to deal with the third party of the corporation. Just let the public own the because this is just as important as water or as electricity or water. And so we have to treat it as such. And the only way we can do that is if the government mandates it and if there is true public control. So I believe we need to look at what has worked in the past and implement this generation's Tennessee Valley Authority.
Education has been a hot button issue, has been for a while. What is, in your mind, an adequate amount of funding for the state education system?
There is no adequate amount. We'll never have enough money to do everything we need to do. When a study comes out that says it's $2 billion, then two reactions we had: oh, I'm surprised it's that bad, or they start discrediting the study. There is no end to the money we will need to educate our youth. We talked about the infrastructure we have to put in there, and we talk about special education, as Arlen pointed out. My wife's a special ed teacher. We know what kids need, and there is no end. We need to address the opioid crisis that affects kids. We need to address mental health. We could easily justify a social worker, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist in almost every school, and they need to be there. Because when we have these mass shootings, and I have an online show called Crimes and Times. I've had experts come on my show to talk about this. And everyone says, well, if we just got him some mental health intervention, it doesn't work that way. We don't recognize it a week before. And the doctors can't say a week before he's going to be a shooter and it's going to happen in the next week. This has to happen at the childhood. We need teachers trained to recognize when there's aberrant behavior and to make a referral, and to the correct referral. We need to engage parents who will acknowledge that there may be problems with their loved ones. Not an easy thing to do. So there's no end to the amount of money. But we have to adequately fund, because one of the things that we need to do in education, we talk about bringing in teachers. And how are we going to bring in teachers? We say we give them a great environment. What do teachers hear when we bring them in there? In the rural areas, they're the lowest paid. They hear about a state that doesn't know how to fund this schooling. They hear about a state that wants to force them to arm themselves at penalty. What kind of environment is that attractive to teachers? So it's not just the money. We have to change our mindset. And we're a long way from doing that. And when I get as governor, I talked about changing the tone. We will change the tone, because we will never attract teachers and young entrepreneurs with the environment that we are setting for the rest of the world to see. Thank you.
That's always the proverbial question: how much is enough? And we know one thing for certain: what we presently have is not enough. And Senator Kelly has had to deal with that situation now for quite some time. And we know every state in this country is battling with the same question: how much is enough? And when do we know how much is enough? But I think one thing that really is not being addressed at all, and that is the special needs issues. It's one thing to fund the schools sufficiently for the normal children. But the trend that is happening that no one is addressing is that now 26% of our children are addressed or classified as special needs. That costs us 2 to 5 times, up to $100,000 per child, in order to have federally mandated IEPs, individual education plans. If you look at the trend from 1980 to today, that trend has not stopped, has not started to flatten out, actually has increased in slope. And in the next 10 to 15 years, we potentially have as many as 50% of our children classified as special needs. So whatever number the legislature comes up with this year that may or may not satisfy the Supreme Court of the state of Kansas, 10 to 15 years from now will not satisfy the federal mandate for IEPs. But more importantly, what are we going to do to stop this continued increase in trend? If you don't have any public health background, you don't have any medical background, you don't have any environmental background, you don't have a clue. It's in the medical literature today. We know what the cause is of autism. We know what the cause is of these special needs problems. Nobody has the guts to address it because it will step on political toes. We know that it's mercury, aluminum, pesticides, and industrial chemicals. We know that because they turn on the genes that cause these problems. We have to address the environmental issues, or it doesn't matter how much money we put out there for education, we will never come close. And right now already, what is it, 47%, I think 48% of the state budget is for education. So when we more than double that amount, we're bankrupt. We're bankrupt. We have to address not only the funding side, we have to also address the cause of this trend with special needs. What else do you?
Okay. Oh, education is very important, and it should be important to everyone in this room, because it's as equally important as our infrastructure or growing our economy, because that's the foundation. Now, I know that we've been having a discussion, in Topeka, the conversation came out as to whether it was going to be $1.7 or $2 billion. And individuals, start becoming concerned and, oh my God, the information is wrong and there's no way that we can actually do that. And we need to come up with another study. Let's be realistic. For the past 7 years, we have not invested in education. And talk to the faculty. When is the last time that they ended up getting a raise increase with the minimum pay that they were actually getting? And then taking it a step farther, buying the tools that were necessary to be able to teach our children. They took their wages and they paid for that. I've actually talked to various different teachers in various different areas that talked about how many reams of paper that they could have through the entire semester. And I can assure you, it wasn't even a case. Just so they could make copies for exams and paperwork that they needed to be able to teach our children. There is no dollar figure that we can actually come up with. And if we came up with the $2 billion, that would just make us even. Even with buying the necessary books, making sure that children get the necessary education they have, but making sure that teachers can do the things that they need to do in the schools and paying them an adequate wage. But those teachers are important because they have our most prized possession that they spend more time with than you and I do. And I'm extremely disappointed when we have this argument that it's not worth that, when a third world country has it figured out. If they can't eat, they're going to make sure that their children get an education. And do you know why that is? Because they know that their children, if they get them that education, that those children may not be able to make it today, but they'll be able to make it tomorrow because they have the educational background, they have the knowledge, they have the experience, and they're competing against your children. And your children will be behind the curve, and they know it. And corporate America does not have the loyalty that many of us would like to have because we grew up here in Kansas, or because we were in Hutchinson, or because we were in the United States, that they want to stay right here. They're going to where there's the best and the brightest. And if we don't provide it, they're going to where it's at. And our children will still live with an adequate health care. It's up to us to be able to do that and to find a way to be able to make that type of investment. And we have to do that. Is that telling me time's up? Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I didn't know whether 5 seconds or not. It's up to us to make that decision, and we have to make our children a priority, and education is a priority. And we certainly don't need to be arming our teachers with guns. This is not a combat zone.
I'm going to kind of go along with everyone else in that we don't really know the exact figures that would truly adequately fund education for Kansas students. But I think what we have to look at is we have to look at providing an environment where our best and brightest teachers will want to stay in Kansas. Right now, a lot of our teachers, especially new teachers, that they're leaving the state and they're going to Missouri or they're going to the coast because that's where they can find a better paying job to support their family. And honestly, we want these. I'm born in Kansas, and we wish that they could stay. And I think there's many ways we can do that. We can stop making them pay for their books, and we can stop making them, pay for classroom supplies. We can give them a way so you can truly raise a family on. I know this is a little off topic, but in Oklahoma, I've been watching the situation down there, and there was an interview. I know in Oklahoma City, a lot of school districts there have gone to 4 days a week because they don't make enough money to actually survive on, and a lot of teachers have to go work at like Walmart gas station on Mondays so they can make rent. I think, we look at, Oklahoma and Kansas, we're sort of on the same parallel. It's not quite as bad here as it is in Oklahoma, but we have to make sure that we don't get into a similar situation and that we're properly paying teachers and we can get back to having the world-class education system that we once were known for. And I think that starts with giving teachers a substantial raise and making sure that they do not have to pay for their own classroom supplies, and that our children have the teachers and that they have the materials to learn.
I think the question was, how much is enough? And we can look at that question too. How much is enough to actually adequately train, educate our students, or how much is going to satisfy the court? And right now, at this moment, we're battling with both of those questions. We know that we have not invested enough in education over the past 8 years. That's clear. The court has made that clear. So have studies. I mean, it's been interesting. We have watched our student grades and performance go down as we have underfunded our schools. There are studies that show that there is a direct correlation between the amount of money that you spend and the performance of your children. We are trying to recognize that, given the reality that we just restored taxes last year, the ones that Brownback and Collier cut back in 2012 and 2013, which led to our serious underfunding of schools. We reversed that last year, partially, almost all the way. We're still waiting for the dust to settle to see how much that we've got. We knew we would have at least enough so that we put $300 million more in education last year for fiscal year 18, fiscal year 19. This year, we have a bill that would put in another about $525 million on schools. So we're looking at a little over $800 million that we will invest in schools, I think, when everything is said and done and we shut the doors on the legislature this year. There are also some other things that we're doing that I think we will present to the court to get credit for as impacting our education system. We're talking about mental health and putting social workers and psychologists actually in our school buildings. Instead of doing what the governor suggested in his State of the State, which was hire 150 new school counselors, what we're actually looking at is working with our community mental health centers or other behavioral health providers in our communities, partner with them and the schools so that they are actually the employers of the psychologists and the social workers, but those people are then put in the schools. But when the schools close for the summer, these folks will still be available to our students and to their families on holidays, summer, and weekends. So we just think that's a more creative way of doing it, and we're going to try to get some credit from the court for putting that funding in. The other thing that I've been able to do is to get some additional funding for early childhood education into our budget for this year. And again, we want to make sure that the court is giving us credit for that. As governor, what I plan to do is to use the model in Wichita, the TOPS, the Opportunity Project, that is a public-private partnership between a business in Wichita and the state, and has created this incredible early childhood center that provides wraparound services for kids from prenatal to 5th grade or to 5 years old. They have incredible success at putting kids in kindergarten and those kids going on to be stellar students. So those are the kinds of things that we need to do. We need to invest creatively in our education system from early childhood right through our university and into workforce training.
Well, we started a little late, but they're going to kick us out on time. We've got to be out of here by about 6 o'clock, and we want to allow you all that hour from 5 to 6 to be able to talk to the candidates out front. So we're going to move on. We're going to stay in the order, but we're going to move on to closing statements, and everybody will have 5 minutes.
Can we start here?
Yes.
Well, thank you again very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here. It's a beautiful day. And we have a lot of things that need to be improved in Kansas. And I think every one of you, well, I know every one of you, has to make a decision as to which candidate in the primary you're going to vote for. I doubt that there's much question who you're going to vote for in the general election. But in the primary election, what we have to understand is that there's just these two things that we just talked about: education and health care. And one thing you need to understand, as we fund education, all of that money stays in the state of Kansas. Think about it. So we have a $2 billion budget or whatever it is. That money, yes, it's Kansas taxpayer money, it stays here. Healthcare, on the other hand, nearly half of that $8,700 per person on Medicaid leaves the state. You want to expand Medicaid before you overhaul it? I say we need to overhaul it so that the majority of that money stays in the state of Kansas. Now, how do I know that money leaves? Because it's been privatized. The 3 companies that are private companies in Medicaid are not headquartered in Kansas, nor are their CEOs. The other great amount of money that's spent in healthcare is on medications, radiology, and laboratories. Those are not companies that are headquartered in Kansas. That money leaves. That's why Australia only spends $4,300 per person. That's why Canada only spends about $7,000 to $8,000 per person. That's why the European countries spend half or less than half what we spend in this country for health care. Because the money actually goes for the care of the people. My practice, about a third of it, is Medicaid and Medicare. I know what it's about. So when somebody tells me, oh, we just need to expand the system, no, every single day I have to deal with, doctor, that's not medically necessary. Doctor, that's not medically necessary. The system is broken. Just because somebody has Medicaid insurance doesn't mean they actually have coverage. Doesn't mean they're actually going to get taken care of. The system is significantly broken. We have to overhaul that system. I have the expertise to do that. I know that system as well. And by the way, that's half of the remaining budget for the state of Kansas. Once you take care of education, the other half is health care. And yes, a part of that has to be mental health care. As a colonel in the Air Force, I understand professional leadership training. I understand what it takes to set a mission, decide what are the goals that we need to set in order to achieve that mission. I understand how to bring people together. I have to do that. We don't have Democrats and Republicans in the military when it comes to dealing with getting the mission done. As well, I have education background. Not only do I teach adults, I taught high school. We have to go to the teachers. Ask the teachers what it is that you need. We make a lot of assumptions. The legislature makes a lot of assumptions. We need the teacher input to decide really what it is that they need. But most importantly, we have a lot of issues that the Democratic Party has in their platform nobody really wants to address. Environmental issues, water quality issues, food quality issues, reservation issues. I know how to solve those problems, not just have talking points. I know how to increase the carbon in the soil so 5 years we could be carbon neutral. I know how to do that in agriculture. It starts with adding carbon every time that you put a fertilizer on the ground. I know how to do that. I teach that around the world. We have the data to prove that we know how to teach that. I am the person that has the actual scientific qualifications to do this and the military training to be able to put it together. I appreciate you being here today. My website is anderson2018.com. I appreciate any help or any comments that you have. Please send me an email and I'll answer it. Thank you.
What's the question? Closing. Thank you. I apologize for the raspy voice. This is my 4th speaking event today. So, the voice is trying to leave here. You know, we've talked about a lot of issues, and I have traveled this entire state and heard a lot of conversation on what communities need, what families need, and what cities need. I served as mayor of the largest city. I've served in the military. I have a large family, 4 children, 13 grandchildren, 5 great-grandchildren. So certainly I have an investment in education and schools. Certainly I have an investment in each and every one of these. But my biggest investment is investing in our future and to us. And I've seen how decisions at the state and federal level have affected our communities and our families and our homes. And where they dictate policy to us as to what our quality of life will be. And I fought those. I've represented many of you. I've represented the city of Hutchinson on national issues, whether it be immigration, or whether it be healthcare, or whether it be economics. What is it going to take for us to grow our communities and grow? And that's what we have to do. We have to start coming up with an overall strategy of being able to bring everybody to the table and working together. Because the few, the handful, are not doing it. We've got to come back to the grassroots level, working with your city council, with your commissions, and with you, and giving you an opportunity to weigh in, because no one knows better than you. And I did that as mayor. And that's the type of leadership, the type of person that I am. I learned from the military, being an officer in the military. I trained hundreds of soldiers to prepare them to go to Desert Storm for combat. And I had to make sure that each and every one of them understood what the mission was and how to do their job and get their input and how to do it the best way. I come from corporate America, understanding best practices and not letting my ego to get in the way that I may have all the answers and that somebody else may have a better answer. And we produce an excellent product. And I led the largest city in the state of Kansas during the worst economic times by bringing everyone together, millennials, the next generation, and individuals that lived through the Depression, and taking their best practices and saying, this is where we're going to go. How do we survive this? Because that's what it's all about. We're at a point where we're in survival mode. And we survive. We survive. Now, we have to do this in Kansas. We've got to create a totally different environment in Kansas. We've got to create a totally different economic environment in Kansas, where we're diversifying what we have, where we're not just totally focused on manufacturing and agriculture and tax. We've got to expand all of those. We've got to promote ourselves to the rest of the world as to who we are and what we have to offer. Whether it be people, whether it be brain power, or whether it be products. But nobody's going to tell our story like we're going to tell a story. With me being the governor of the state of Kansas, you're going to find out that you'll have that opportunity to be there at the table and you'll be able to have a voice. But you'll also have a governor that'll be in your community listening to you and not waiting on somebody else to tell you. But you'll also have a governor that will always keep it on the forefront that he or she works for you. Each of you individually. Those of you that are voters, those Republicans that flipped over and changed their party affiliation and became Democrats, that we work for them. With me as governor, you're going to have the opportunity to work alongside Republicans, independents, and Democrats. And we're going to come to real solutions and be able to solve real problems that are affecting our communities and our families. So I encourage you to think very seriously. It's time for change in the state of Kansas. And who do we want? Do we want the status quo, what we've been doing for the past 50 years? Or are we somebody different? And do we want to bring about change that's going to ripple across this entire country? I encourage you to go look at Brewer for Kansas and certainly to get in contact with me.
Well, I want to again thank everyone for being here. It was the questions were great, and I think hope to give all of you a sense of who best represents, regardless of who it is. You know, some people though they say that I am the least qualified candidate, but I really don't believe that. I believe that when it comes to qualifications, it doesn't really matter really based on prior experience. While that can help and that can help someone lead in an office, I don't believe it's a determining factor. What I believe is that if you're compassionate, if you care truly about the people, and you truly want to see a state be better for, state be better for everyone, I think it is best that you have someone who understands the issues, and who is compassionate, and I think all of us meet that requirement, so I really think we're all equally qualified, and that's my argument. There are many issues I didn't get to address in the questions, so I am going to be listing off some of my platform positions that I believe strongly about that were not brought up today. One of them is meaningful drug reform. We need to legalize marijuana, ultimately recreationally. Not only are we putting people in jail for using medicine and for altering their consciousness, we're also putting our students in peril, because we are not doing what many other states, such as Colorado and Washington, are doing, which they have legalized it for recreational purposes, and they are using a lot of the money, the tax revenue raised from selling it, into education, something our education funding is something our state desperately needs. So when we have it illegalized in Kansas, not only is the prohibition harming families, splitting up families, and locking up, filling up our jails, we're also harming our students. Another thing is we need to get rid of the sales tax on food. It's a tax on rural people and poor people. But honestly, even if we get rid of the tax, the state is at a loss right now, and we need to make sure that we don't lose any revenue. So what I support is replacing the grocery tax with a luxury goods tax, so those at the top can pay their fair share, while those at the bottom get to keep every penny they need to put food on the table. And also, my final issue is a little more gray. I believe that we need to combat corruption, and I believe that's why I'm the best candidate. Not that any of the candidates on here are corrupt, but I have no previous biases. I have never been involved in government, and I believe that honestly, if you've never been involved in something, you're coming in with a fresh face. You're coming in with, yes, I have ideas on what I want to do with Kansas, but I don't have any connections. I'm walking in there just to do my job and to serve the people that elected me. And then I think that's what makes me a uniquely qualified choice. And also, I'm going to make one more point that my team wants me to bring out, so I'm just going to say it, unless they get mad at me. Me and my running mate, we're the youngest candidates in the race. That means that we will have to live with our consequences of our actions in office, the longest out of anyone on the stage. So I think that means we have a special stake in this. And thank you so much. And if you want to learn more about me, go to jackforkansas.com. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Jack for that caveat on the corruption issue. And also, again, thank the Harvey County and Reno County Democrats for hosting this. It's been delightful. My husband and I came to Kansas 32 years ago because of the opportunities that it afforded our young family at that time. Good jobs, stellar schools, top-notch universities, commitment to community. All of those things have been put at risk over the past 8 years, and we need to change that. So I think if you really want to build Kansas, you want to make Kansas, other young people want to stay in and raise their families, we've got to do a lot of work. And as governor, I will put those kids and those families first. I do want those young people to stay here and raise their families. I do want Kansas to be an innovative business destination that attracts companies. And I do want our schools to be the very best in the nation. After years of turmoil, Kansas really needs a leader who knows how to bring people together to solve problems. That's exactly what I plan to do. And I do have the experience, and I think experience is important, particularly at this point in Kansas history. We have lived through some chaotic times. We need an experienced, calm, steady governor who has the relationships and the grit to get into that office and start to work on day one to produce results for our families. You know, throughout my career, I have worked with other people, whether I agree with them or not, if I can do that to solve the problems. It is how I became a Democrat senator in a very Republican district. It's how I have gotten things done in the legislature, and it is how I will win in November. I look forward to your support, I look forward to your vote, and I thank you all for being here today.
I have met corrupt politicians. And I must say, no greater joy than putting them in jail. When I look at the state of our state, I see trouble ahead. You've heard the issues. And we are up against a force that seems to want to impede progress. We're up against a force that wants to put their political and personal agendas before yours. That troubles me. It should trouble all of us. My personal troubles come from looking back at my career. And I think back during my times in New York City, working probably the most dangerous assignments I could work, narcotics. We had a task force of 30 people. Some Dems, some Republicans. Different races, different religions. Different opinions, different personalities. Some of us didn't even like each other. But never did we worry that somebody would not do the right thing because of those differences. And that's what we should be doing in our legislature, in our government. When I say I have experience in making things work, I don't just say it, I write it. And I have a book out there that has been endorsed by members of the financial community, the business community, because they endorse my ideas and they've asked me to consult with them. Please take a look at it. When we meet this force in government that we must contend with in this state, we must meet it with strength and with resolve. But we also must meet it with an open hand. One of friendship, one of reconciliation. Because if we do not negotiate, if we do not compromise, we will achieve nothing and we will not be serving you. I want to take that experience and serve you. One topic that we did not discuss, along with the other ones that Chad pointed out, public safety. A big issue. I don't think any candidate on any ticket will come close to my experience on public safety. Please go to my website. I will tell you my positions on public safety and criminal justice reform. I'm Michael Tabman. I want to be your next governor. Thank you. And thank you for all the members here. If you notice, we're competitors, but look at the way we treat each other. With dignity and respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. And the candidates will stick around, and we hope you will too.